So the bald video, you wanted to do a video on being bald.
Bald. The joy of being part of the bald community. I never had a problem with it. It's funny, I look back at the photographs, I go through my negatives and find pictures of myself to give to you, to show me in action behind a camera. I think, my God, my hair was thinning in my 20s. I wasn't even aware of it. When I was at college, I shaved all my hair off. I liked the look. It sort of seemed modern and simple, minimalist, kind of brutal and masculine in a really good way. As I've got older, I've just leaned more and more into it. I do regard myself as a proud member of the bald community, as Larry David says.
You are not bald, okay? You have chosen to shave your hair. That's a look that you're cultivating to be fashionable, and we don't really consider you part of the bald community, with all due respect.
I don't think there are any people who have really great hair who are cool. Whereas I can name lots of people, Michael Stipe, who we're going to do this video about, who are bald and they're very, very cool. Pep Guardiola, maybe not so cool at the moment. Eric Ten Hag.
These are all football.
There are a lot of football references. But, you know, just generally, there's nothing wrong with a sort of a natural, human, inevitable consequence of getting older as a man. And one of those things is your hair might thin and you might lose it. And that's okay.
There's definitely a lot of cool bald people, but there's still some very cool people who have hair.
Absolutely. We're not going to do down the people with great heads of hair, you know.
That sounds really spiteful.
No, I mean, you know, this video would never be sponsored by Regain minoxidil because I would never be one of those people that...
hymns or...
Yeah, I was never concerned about that. Michael Stipe, again, this is another interesting video because it's one of those ones where I got lots of material. It was a big shoot. It was for the cover of Attitude magazine, which is a gay magazine in the UK, around 2003. And it was the first time he actually announced that he was gay. I mean, I didn't know he was gay before then. You know, he was sort of this rather enigmatic, unknowable, inscrutable figure. And then this cover feature was him sort of saying, yeah, I'm gay. This is who I am. It was a situation where I got lots of very composed and conventionally good kind of studio lit portraits, but the picture that got used on the cover, the best picture, was when we were just hanging out and getting ready and he was having his makeup done and there was some beautiful light coming in from behind. He was sort of slightly backlit and he had a beautiful silhouette, that wonderful bald head. I just took a quick picture on my Hasselblad with Tri-X and I was really pleased they used that picture on the cover.
Did you build rapport with him being bald yourself?
We didn't actually, I don't remember us discussing it.
Bald bonding.
But it was always there in the background. brothers of the skin. Interestingly, and I don't know whether you're going to put this in, but when I first came to London, and this is something that photographers who are starting out might be interested in knowing, you know, I had no work. You know, I was working in a data center, inputting data for £5 an hour. I was sort of scraping, you know, I was a terrible assistant. I worked as a runner on a few commercials. So I actually worked with Ridley Scott on a commercial, the famous directed Blade Runner, and I worked with Stephen Frears and I did a bit of running, but I was struggling and I decided, I was very entrepreneurial, and I put a little card in Holborn Library. I said, do you want to have your portrait taken? £100 all in. And an American guy got in touch, he phoned me, he left a message, it was before mobile phones, he left a message, and we met up in Piccadilly. He was on holiday and he wanted some photographs. He's very, very sweet. And we walked around the West End and I took his picture.
Have you got these pictures still?
I don't know, I'll have a look. They were terrible pictures. He didn't really deserve to pay £100 for them, they were just rubbish. But we formed a kind of bond. Back then we both had hair, we were just starting out. And several months later, we'd had this conversation about this band called R.E.M that I'd never heard of. And he sent me a little tape of the best R.E.M songs.
Wow.
And that was the first time I heard of R.E.M and I've been a fan ever since, really. Yeah, so...
But you couldn't do that now. Put in portrait for £100 in a newspaper. I doubt it would get you.
It was in the library.
Or the library, anything.
Yeah.
I just doubt that would get you any.
No. It was an analog era.
Yeah.
It was a little handwritten note.
Even putting in a Facebook page or something like that.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get jobs.
Yeah. But I mean, I only got one job. That was him.
You
but
got lucky.
It was, and who'd have thought that, he sent me the tape, and that was back in, would have been early 90s. And then maybe a decade later, I'd actually be photographing Michael Stipe.
Yeah, it's
How
crazy.
cool is that?
I thought R.E.M would been. I thought you would have heard of them. I'd imagine they'd be quite big through the 80s.
No, they were kind of an indie
Okay.
band, and I was just starting out. I wasn't, I was young. I was into the Smiths, mainly kind of British bands. But the shoot with Michael was at the Berkeley Hotel, right by Hyde Park Corner. We had access to this bar called the Blue Bar. Everything's interconnected because a few years after that shoot, I ended up photographing the designer of the Blue Bar. We were in this hotel, and it was at our disposal because Michael Stipe by this stage was incredibly famous. Night Swimming, all these amazing tracks that kind of were the soundtrack of people's lives. I remember he was very sweet. I haven't got a bad word to say about him. He was lovely. He was very creative. Because it was for Attitude, I think we had a stylist from Attitude, and they brought along all these kind of really crazy outfits, a bit like Batman. So he had this kind of, it might have been made of rubber or latex or something, and it had a sort of hood. And so that was kind of very graphic, and I did some pictures with that were more lit with flash. And then I took him out in the street. As I say, lots of white stucco buildings around there, so I had him sitting on the curb. They used all the pictures. It was a good selection of images, and we'll bring them up. But the interesting thing, as I said, is that it's always the case that you have to be alive to something just falling in your lap. And as with Kevin Garnett, I was just sort of chatting to him. He was having his makeup done, and that was the picture that was used on the cover. None of these pictures that were kind of very set up and agreed upon and contrived in a way.
Orchestrated, yeah.
Orchestrated, exactly.
So I'm glad he was nice. That makes me happy to hear.
But also, I just love the way he's his face is wrinkled, and there's real soul in the way that he looks. And I think he's a sort of embodiment of acceptance,
Yeah.
Lovely guy.
Cool.